space bar work? Okay. I was talking with some of the people beforehand, and the title of this talk is a little risky, right? Because I have good intentions for this talk, but hopefully it'll come off okay, right? If it doesn't, it may actually be an example of some of the things I'm trying to talk about here. We've probably all experienced this kind of trying to think we're doing something that's nice and reasonable, or is something that'll be appreciated. Anybody who's been married maybe has run into this situation, right? Where you think you've done something that's nice for your spouse, and it turns out you've missed the mark, right? Anybody who's kind of bought an appliance for a spouse on a birthday or something like that? Well, she said she wanted a vacuum, but she just didn't want it on the birthday. So we've all kind of experienced this. Now, I'm going to do a little historical aside, because I like history. I still read history, and I majored in history actually as an undergraduate, along with mathematics as well. So, have any of you heard anything about John Wakefield's nuts? Okay, easy now. It's not an anatomical reference. Okay? All right? Maybe you've heard it about the Tanganyika ground nut scheme. All right? Ground nuts. Anybody heard about that? Okay, well, I'll tell you a little bit of the story. Post World War II, Europe was in the process of getting out of Africa. Basically, they had a bunch of colonies down there, and after World War II, they were trying to get out of there. But they kind of wanted to do it with, kind of in a reasonable way. They wanted to get out of there and leave the country some way of kind of sustaining their existence, right, without having, Mother England or Mother Germany or Mother France, all the countries in Europe supporting them. Right? Well, turns out Frank Samuel, who was was involved with Unilever, right, which is still around. It's a British company, right? Unilever, they make soaps and things like that. Suggested planting 8,000 acres of peanuts in Tanganyika, right, which is now Tanzania today, as a test project, right, because there was a need for peanut oil, right, for the products that Unilever was producing. So they thought this might be a good idea, right? There's a map of Tanzania today. Right? That's what it looks like. It's on the east coast of Africa, right? With the Indian Ocean over here, right? Lake Victoria, which is the source of the Nile, at the north part of the country. Well, it turns out that there was a gentleman in Britain at the time, John Wakefield, who had actually spent time in Tanzania as the director of agriculture. And so the British government asked him to kind of look into this idea. Well, he got really excited about it. Right? He got so excited about it that he developed a 6-year plan to cultivate way more than 8,000 acres. He wanted to cultivate 150,000 acres of peanuts near this community of Dodoma here in the central part of the country. And the government, jumped on this project and thought, this is a good thing, right? And authorized 25 million pounds for this project. Right? This is back in right after World War II. 25 million pounds today is what, somewhere near $50 million? I don't know, something like that today, right? So that's a pretty big investment. We're starting to talk about some serious money. Okay, so why would we want to do something like this? Well, turns out that the locals had actually cultivated peanuts there on a very small scale. So they've demonstrated feasibility, right, that it can be done there. And there was a huge belief at this time that they could expand the cultivation of peanuts, or the crop of peanuts, by using modern Western agricultural equipment down there, instead of farmers using rakes and hoes. There was a market for the peanut oil in Europe, right? They needed the peanut oil for their products. So it could end up providing a major source of the economy for Tanzania when Britain decided to, remove their support. And this kind of reiterates that, right? So they could do that without an undesirable economic downturn. And furthermore, they felt like if they could provide an example down there somewhere of where Western equipment, Western agricultural equipment, could significantly impact agriculture down there, that they might be able to do it in other places in Africa and develop other crops and potentially avoid the issues of famine in the future in that area. So there were a lot of reasons for potentially doing it, a lot of good reasons. However, there were some drawbacks. The ground cover was very difficult to remove. Basically, no one knew how to do it. This Henry Morgan Stanley, who was the same one of the Livingston, I presume, quote, right? Stanley and Livingston, said that that area was an interminable jungle of thorn bushes. And Alan Wood, who was actually a engineer who worked on this project for the British government and actually wrote a book about it, said that it was just scrub that only a rhinoceros could maybe push its way through, or a snake could slither through, but nothing in between was going to get through it. So it wasn't maybe the best location, right? Turned out that getting the right equipment there was pretty difficult. Turned out that year the rains were so bad that the road from the major port of Dar es Salaam on the Indian Ocean was washed out, right? So they had to transport all the equipment by dirt road back to Dodoma. And they had to forge rivers and things like that. They said that they had to fight off lions and crocodiles and all those types of things in getting the equipment there. And then by February, they were supposed to have all the equipment they needed. But by April, they had only got 16 smaller tractors who reached the site, and they were totally inadequate for doing the job. Right? What they found out was tractors weren't going to work on this ground cover. To clear it, what they had to do, the technique they finally developed, was they had to get two bulldozers, put a heavy chain between them, and go down the land, right? Down the land and clear out the thorn bushes. That didn't even work because there were these trees there that had to be cleared that the chain couldn't get, so they had to have another bulldozer kind of go after those. And doing that, they could clear about 40 acres a day. Right? Without that, they could never get more than about a tenth of that. Okay? There's another story that they tell about the project. They actually sent an order, the chains that they were looking for, they needed really heavy, thick chains. And the only thing they could think of was anchor chains for ships, right? So they put an order in for anchor chains with the British procurement agencies. And the procurement people looked at it and said, that makes no sense. So they threw it in the wastebasket. So they had to go back and do it several times in order to get their chains. So that was a bit of a fiasco. Right? The trees that we talked about were baobab trees, and they were often infested with killer bees. And of course, a lot of the workers were stuck to the point of having to end up in the hospital. Once the ground was cleared, that wasn't the end of the problem, right? There were still those roots there, right? So the roots had to be removed. And that proved to be difficult as well. In fact, what they found out is that the root cutters they had, when they started working with them, were destroyed in a matter of minutes. Right? There was no equipment known to man at that time for doing this job. Okay? So they ended up doing a lot of it by hand. The average rainfall in the area was marginal for peanuts. And they didn't really know this at the time because the records weren't all that great back then. Right? And there was no really readily available source of water close to the location that they chose. Right? So, while during the rainy season, the soil was a mixture and had enough moisture in it that they could actually plant the peanuts, right? When the rain stopped, right, the ground got so hard, they couldn't cultivate them, right? Peanuts grow underground. They couldn't get to them, right? So they had to ship in water, which they had to store somewhere, right? So they had to build these big concrete storage areas, which ended up being swimming pools for the locals. They tried to discourage it, but it happened. Okay. And finally, the local labor force was often